Welcome to this explainer. Look, as students and aspiring builders, you've probably been fed the classic Silicon Valley myth that startup success is just a pure meritocracy. You know the drill. Have a great idea, write phenomenal code, hustle 24/7, and you're going to win. But listen closely, because we're about to dive into some fascinating data that shatters that illusion. The reality? Your success is heavily dictated by something entirely outside of your code base. It's actually dictated by your geography.
Let's kick things off with a brilliant thought experiment from our source material. I want you to imagine 8 software engineers. They are completely identical in every way, equally brilliant, equally ambitious, exact same coding chops. And they all decide to build the exact same global product. Let's call it a massively scalable marketplace app, kind of like Uber. They're starting out entirely alone, zero inherited wealth. So out of these 8 clones, who actually succeeds?
Well, here's the lineup. We've got engineers in the US, the UK, Singapore, the UAE, China, India, Nigeria, and Pakistan. Even though their work ethic and technical skills are literal carbon copies of one another, their probability of business success is wildly different. Why? Because you don't build a company in a vacuum, you build it inside an economic system. And that system acts as either a massive tailwind pushing you forward or a crushing headwind fighting your every move.
To really grasp this, we've got to look at the most critical hidden variable in all of entrepreneurship: runway.
Runway is exactly what it sounds like, guys. It's the amount of time you can survive, physically and economically, before the cash just dries up. Building a startup isn't a quick sprint. It's a grueling marathon that usually takes 3 to 10 years of constant failure, pivoting, and long stretches with zero revenue. So naturally, a founder who has a 5-year economic buffer is going to make entirely different strategic choices than a founder who only has 5 months before they literally can't afford rent.
Just look at this purchasing power gap. It's absolutely staggering. A senior dev in Silicon Valley might be able to squirrel away 80 to 120 grand in a single year. An equally talented dev in Pakistan might only save $2,000 to $5,000. Now, you might say, well, the cost of living is way lower there. True, but that doesn't fix the core problem. Global startup infrastructure, things like AWS servers, AI APIs, Apple's developer fees, they're all dollar-denominated. So a founder in an emerging market is paying a brutal premium. A $200 monthly cloud bill is pocket change in California, but it can literally bankrupt a solo founder in India or Nigeria.
Because of that huge gap in savings and those dollar-denominated costs, we see a massive divide in how much these founders can actually experiment. The US founder has the slack to fail, learn, and pivot 5 or 10 times. They can afford to get it wrong. Meanwhile, our equally talented founder in Pakistan faces total financial ruin after just 1 or 2 failed launches. And since startup success basically requires repeated iteration, some founders literally just cannot afford the cost of iterating.
And that economic disparity feeds right into the next major hurdle we're looking at today, the ecosystem trust gap. Geography doesn't just empty your wallet, it dictates the invisible networks around you.
High-income ecosystems are basically startup compounding machines. If you're in the US, you casually bump into elite university alumni, you're surrounded by dense angel networks, and you've got ex-founders constantly reinvesting their cash and advice back into the community. You might literally find your first early adopter while waiting in line for coffee. But if you are a builder outside of those hubs, you don't get those casual multipliers. You have to be incredibly intentional about building that network completely from scratch.
And this totally warps fundraising. Investors, by nature, are not geography neutral. They are analyzing local legal systems, political stability, all of it. So raising global capital in the US, considered very easy. Singapore, easy. But watch how fast the friction scales. If you're grinding away in Nigeria, it's difficult. Pakistan, very difficult. It creates this massive asymmetry where you're fighting an uphill battle for capital, regardless of how phenomenal your actual product is.
Which brings us to a really visceral concept from the data, something every founder in a developing ecosystem feels in their bones: the invisible tax on ambition.
Think about how failure is treated depending on where you live. In the US, a failed startup is practically a badge of honor. Put it on your resume, keep your social status, and go grab a high-paying tech job on Monday. It's incredibly survivable. But in places like India or Nigeria, failure carries severe real-world consequences. We're talking immense family pressure, threats to basic survival, and even damaged marriage prospects. When the stakes are that high, it structurally destroys a founder's risk tolerance. You're forced to play defense and optimize for immediate survival instead of aggressively swinging for the fences.
When you add all this up, founders in developing nations are paying this staggering invisible labor tax.
If we say a US founder's effort level is the baseline, 1.0x, an Indian founder has to put in 2.2 times the effort for the exact same momentum. A Nigerian founder? 3 times the effort. A Pakistani founder is at 3.5x. They are burning immense creative energy just battling weak infrastructure, dealing with rolling power outages, fighting visa rejections, and constantly trying to overcome global investor bias.
So when we finally look at the estimated relative success odds, the stark reality hits you. Index a US founder's odds at 100, and the Indian founder sits at 35. The Pakistani founder drops to 12. And I really want to emphasize this point. These numbers have absolutely zero to do with human intelligence, drive, or coding ability. They are purely a measurement of systemic leverage. It's the system imposing the friction, not the founder lacking the skill.
Okay, I know that sounds pretty heavy. But if you're a student or an entrepreneur building in a high-friction zone, how do you actually fight back? Let's talk about overcoming that geographic friction. If you are tuning in from Lagos, Karachi, or Bangalore, you have to act like a global founder from day one. Do not let your physical borders dictate your potential. You need to aggressively deploy today's technological equalizers. Use AI tools to massively multiply your coding and marketing output. That's how you bridge the gap when you can't afford a huge local team. Hook into global payment gateways immediately so you can accept foreign currency, tap into remote work, dive deep into international digital communities, and build that elite network yourself online. The internet is literally your escape hatch from local constraints.
And here is the amazing silver lining in all this data. The immense crushing pressure of these developing systems acts as an incredible forge. The outlier founders who manage to survive it. Think about legendary teams behind Paystack in Nigeria or Careem in the UAE. They developed this unmatched, gritty persistence. Because they couldn't just casually throw investor cash at their problems, they became wildly efficient and creative. If you can survive that gauntlet, you come out the other side as an absolute force of nature.
Ultimately, if you take nothing else away from this explainer, remember this. The biggest advantage in the startup world isn't your tech stack. It's not your pitch deck. It is economic survivability. The founder who figures out how to stay economically afloat just long enough to keep iterating is the one who secures a wildly disproportionate chance of winning. Guard your runway with everything you have.
This quote, straight from the source material, just hits the nail on the head. Talent is global, opportunity is not. Look, the world is getting flatter, and tech is definitely chipping away at these geographic walls. But right now, today, your local economy still heavily weights your dice. The raw talent is everywhere. The runway and the funding, not so much.
So, knowing the absolute reality of this global playing field, I want to leave you with a challenge. If you are building in a high-friction environment, you know the game is incredibly tough. The system is heavy. But the exact tools you need to equalize those odds and completely bypass your physical borders are sitting right there on your laptop. So, what are you going to do to transcend those borders and write your own success story?